G'day, and welcome to another episode of Tartarian Truthers with your hosts, Casey and JoJo. Before we get started, we want to say a heartfelt thank you to these people for their support by purchasing some of our merch from our merch store. And you are so amazing. We are so glad there are people out there repping our stuff. And if you have got some merch already, please send us a pic because we would love to share it in a future episode.
Yes, we sure would. Thank you so much to everyone who's bought merch so far. You are so appreciated. Now, before we move on to the actual start of the episode, we just want to mention that unfortunately it appears that we are shadow banned at the moment. So our views have decreased dramatically and people are telling us that they're not getting notifications when we put out new content. So we're just asking from the bottom of our hearts for you to please consider sharing our content with your friends and your family and on social media too, if that's something that you want to do to help us out. Because it's really pretty disheartening, isn't it, JoJo?
Mm-hmm.
You know, these times of digital censorship, you know, no freedom of speech and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I know. It sucks. And hopefully you guys can help. And even if you leave a comment, that actually helps with the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much, everybody that does watch us anyway and share. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. We really do appreciate all of the views that we are getting.
Exactly. Now, we had such a brilliant response from our Star Forts and Golf Courses episode with people commenting and emailing us all sorts of interesting locations here in Oz and a few of them from overseas too. But we got so many that we thought we'd make a follow-up episode so we could share them all with you.
That's right. So let's take a look, shall we? So this first one is not actually in Australia. Wouldn't it be cool if it was? But we must have a few keen-eyed Tartarian truthers out there who are also big cricket fans, because we had quite a few people contact us about this one, known as Galle Fort in Sri Lanka.
So what a beautiful backdrop for a game of cricket, huh? And this fort is said to have been built in 1588 by the Portuguese, then extensively fortified by the Dutch during the 17th century from 1649 onwards, and it is right next to the Galle cricket ground. Do you notice the obelisk there too, though?
Yes, of course, always with the obelisks, huh?
Oh.
So I looked it up, and so this one was added in 1921 as, you guessed it, a war memorial or a modern day blood sacrifice, same thing. If you aren't sure what we mean by that, please check out our Obelisks of Oz episode for more info. But moving on, and unfortunately, cricket here may not be happening for much longer because of this. This is because the stadium, with views of the sparkling blue Indian Ocean, could be demolished because its pavilion stand violates heritage laws protecting a 17th century Dutch fort. According to the government, Cultural Affairs Minister, I'm sorry guys, I can't pronounce that name, so we're just going to skip that part, told Parliament Friday that the fort risks losing UNESCO World Heritage status because of unauthorised construction, including Galle's 500-seat pavilion. We have to decide if we want to remain in the World Heritage List or keep the pavilion, they said.
There's that UNESCO status again. They're always lurking around all the best stuff, hey?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye out and find out what they decide to do with that, because they are very big on cricket in Sri Lanka. So it would be a big loss for them to not be able to play there anymore, hey?
Yeah, definitely. It'd be huge. Alrighty, so let's move to Australia now. So this one came to our attention from Steve in a comment on YouTube. So this is East Point Reserve in Darwin. And in his comment, Steve told us that there used to be World War II gun emplacements there, and it is now the location of a military history museum.
Well, I think he's onto something there, Casey. It definitely looks like there's something hiding under there. And oh my gosh, look at that melt.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty melted, huh?
Goodness.
It is. It's crazy.
Oh.
And while we're still in Darwin, a separate comment from Dan. Now, he suspected that Nightcliff could also be a star fort. What do you reckon, JoJo?
Yeah, definitely. It certainly has the right shape about it and not very far from East Point Reserve either.
That's right. All right, so I wasn't expecting any in Darwin, so that was pretty cool.
Mm.
But now we're going to head down to Melbourne in Victoria. So this is Fort Nepean. So work started on this place back in 1873, according to the history books. And we know you're thinking, who were Australia's enemies back then? But they didn't have any enemies, like literally none at all. And this fort is epic. I mean, it has a maze of tunnels beneath it. It's huge. But apparently, according to the mainstream narrative, it was built to protect Victoria's rich goldfields.
Of course.
I'm not sure how exactly, but that's their story, JoJo, and they're sticking to it.
Jeez, they come up with some crazy stories, don't they?
I know. Totally wild. So, anyway, someone mentioned in a comment to check out Fort Nepean and a few others all around Port Phillip Bay in Melbourne. And upon researching that area, what we discovered was that these forts were all said to have been built in the mid to late 1800s and were part of what was known as the Hobson's Bay Defence System. But before we go check that out, check out this image that we found of Point Nepean, just up from Fort Nepean, so all on the same headland. Does that not look like the remnants of a melted building of sorts to you?
100%, Casey, it does. What the heck? It is insane. I mean, how can people not see that?
I
So
know.
obvious, huh?
It's nuts. It looks like, I don't know, like a turret and a dome. It's definitely not a natural looking rock formation. That's
Not
for
at
sure.
all. Not at all. Okay, so let's take a look at this supposed colonial era defense system, shall we? So, besides Fort Nepean, we also have Fort Gellibrand. And work started on this beauty in the 1860s, which is really what blows my mind because we've already gone into detail about, in our past episodes about Australia's very small population in this time frame. Yet in the 1860s, not only were we supposedly building huge and majestic structures all over the place, but especially in Melbourne, actually. But according to this, we were also building extensive above and underground fortifications in numerous locations.
Yeah, it blows my mind too, Jojo, because I want to know who was doing this and how. I mean, when we look up the history of these forts, all we get is that they were built at this time for this reason. We don't really get any more information than that. I want to know the logistics, the manpower required to dig out and line these tunnels that were built so well that they're still standing rock solid today. I mean, I want to know where they sourced all the materials, how they transported them to each of the sites. There's just so much missing from this story.
Yeah, and don't forget, Casey, that Gellibrand is also home to this Timeball Tower, which they say was built by those bloody brilliant convicts of ours.
That's crazy.
Yep, and it's said to have been originally built as a lighthouse in the early 1840s.
But aren't lighthouses usually round? I mean, this one has four sides.
I know, weird, right? They say it was originally timber, but was then replaced with bluestone from a quarry adjacent to the site, and it served as a lighthouse for a while. Not sure exactly how long, but then a floating lightship was placed offshore, so they decided to turn it into a time ball instead. It remained a time ball until 1926 when it was decided, due to ships' more modern timing technology, such old world tech was no longer required. So they decided to turn it into a lighthouse again, adding a 90-foot circular tower to the top. But then in 1987, they decided that once again, a lighthouse wasn't required. So the Williamstown Historical Society took it over, removed the circular tower, and replaced the time ball mechanism.
Wow, what a wild ride that building has had.
So there's so much more to this defense system, though. It is also made up of Fort Franklin, which they say was built in 1885 because of fear of war with Russia.
Then we have Fort Pierce, which they say came into play later on in the scene in 1910. But who knows? I mean, it could have been discovered that year and repurposed as a fort, hey?
Totally. But look at this one. Still part of Hobson's Bay Defence System. This is South Channel Fort, or South Channel Island, as it's also known. They say that this artificial island was built in the 1880s. It's 6.4 metre above sea level, and it's 122 by 76 metres wide. How busy were the boys back in the day then, huh? I mean, not only undertaking huge construction projects, but even building artificial islands. Just incredible.
Yeah, that is nuts. Seriously, artificial islands in the 1800s, it's crazy. But that's not it. So there's still more. This bay was super, super protected.
Yeah, from gold thieves and Russians. Sounds like something out of a movie script, doesn't it?
It actually does, doesn't it? But yeah, so just quickly, before we move on to the last couple of forts in Hobson's Bay, though, let's just take a quick look at this thing that we came up with when we were researching South Channel Fort. So this is known as Pope's Eye. Now, the story goes that it is the uncompleted foundation for another artificial island fort intended once again to defend the entrance to Port Phillip. And they say construction started in the 1880s.
You mean they needed another one? Really? What in the world were they prepping for in the 1880s that required all of this?
I know, right? So they say that they stopped building it because there were suddenly advancements in naval gunnery. So this one was no longer required. But I don't know, Jojo, this thing is sus. I honestly have no clue what its original purpose was or what it could be the actual remains of or why it was called the Pope's Eye. I mean, all we could find was that it's not named after the Pope himself, but after someone called Mr. Pope. But who that Mr. Pope is, we have no idea. It's all a bit odd.
It really is. But there's still a few more places in the Hobson Bay defense system that we need to check out. Okay, so this one here is Swan Island, and it's a bloody gold mine. How excited did we get when we started researching this one?
Oh my gosh, it was crazy. So, first of all, its history is basically all military, said to have been built in the 1850s, once again, due to fears of attacks. This one from the Crimean War, apparently. So, it's been used by the Australian Defence Force ever since. Then, in the late 1950s, the Australian Secret Intelligence Service acquired a large chunk of it from the Navy, called the Swan Island ACES facility. It has been described as an ultra-secret clandestine warfare centre, used primarily for the training of ACES agents, and is also the location of a substantial ACES communications facility and a special operations storage site, in addition to its ACES special forces, especially from the Special Air Force Regiment under the rubric of the Swan Island Army Detachment.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery around this island. It cost taxpayers $30 million. It's said that highly classified activities are undertaken there, of which nobody knows what they actually are and what they're actually doing. Soldiers have died there. Protesters have broken in and then been assaulted by soldiers, yet no information can be found on government websites regarding this base.
Yeah, and gangland serial killer Carl Williams was even escorted there with his father George in December 2008, where he spent 9 days on the military base giving statements to authorities before he was then returned back to jail. Base is protected by 3-meter barbed wire fences, and boats are not allowed to approach the island. It's so weird.
But there's something even weirder on this island. This location for some of Australia's most top secret agencies also has a freaking luxury golf course on it.
Yep. That's right. Swan Island is also home to the Queenscliff Golf Club, on land leased from the ADF, apparently built in 1907 by someone going only by the name of Mr. Banks. And if you know any more about this Mr. Banks, we'd love to know, as we had trouble finding anything about him besides the fact that he was a championship player who decided that this military island was a great place for a golf course in the early 1900s. Alarm bells.
So, this golf course can only be reached by a one-lane bridge and causeway from Queenscliff. It also has a land-based access point for the Queenscliff Yacht Club. But access to Swan Island is totally restricted to members of the golf and yacht clubs, Defence Department personnel, or by permit, with the only road guarded by a military checkpoint. So you can't just head over there and take your dog for a walk, for example. You literally have to provide proof of identification and proof that you are a golfer or a yachter if you're going to either of those public locations.
Yeah, that's really odd. I mean, to have an ADF base, an ASIS location, and then a golf course, all on a restricted island. I mean, what the heck is going on there?
I know, right? Super, super suspicious, especially when we know that seaside golf courses are more often than not hiding something.
Definitely.
Mm.
Okay, so the last one in the Hobson's Bay defence system before we move on. So you may have heard us just mention Queenscliff when we discussed Swan Island. So Queenscliff is on land just across from the island, and it's got a bit going on too.
Yeah, it does. So, according to the official narrative, it dates back to 1860. There's that date again,
Mm.
when an open battery was constructed to defend the entrance to Port Phillip. Then the fort part of it underwent major redevelopment in the late 1870s and 1880s, which is odd in itself. I mean, why redevelop so soon after building it?
Yeah, and another really interesting thing is that it has one of only two black lighthouses in the world, and the only black lighthouse in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, that's something I've always thought was silly. I mean, most lighthouses are white, right? To make them more visible to ships out at sea. I mean, a black one must be pretty difficult to see. What were they even thinking?
Yeah, true. And once again, the story is that it was built in 1862 to replace an earlier sandstone lighthouse built in 1843 that had structurally deteriorated. So, kind of a bit like the Macquarie Lighthouse story that we discuss in our episode on Macquarie Lighthouse and its mysterious tunnel.
Yeah, yep, I know. And, that's all good and well. But at the same time, they also built a white lighthouse on the same site. And this white lighthouse was also built to replace an apparent dilapidated timber lighthouse. I mean, that story doesn't make sense, does it, Casey?
Yeah, I know. I mean, why replace two lighthouses at the same time? Because that means for a while there wouldn't have been any lighthouses on that point to guide ships in the night because they were both being replaced. And why make one black and one white? I mean, according to the info that we could find, they were both built from the same black stone, but then they just painted one white but not the other.
Yeah, that's so bloody weird, man.
Yeah, it is. And they call one the low light and one the high light. I don't know, Jojo. I just get the feeling that all this stuff was already here and had been for a while, which is the real reason why it was getting replaced or renovated and then repurposed as a government defense system, basically.
Yep, I 100% agree because it said that by 1891, Port Phillip was one of the most heavily defended harbours in the British Empire.
Wow, even more so than Sydney. That is wild. But anyway, okay, so look, we realize that a lot of these places don't necessarily resemble star forts, but we just thought it was very important and quite interesting that one, these kind of fortifications were required in colonial Australia, and two, how and who was building them in a time when there wasn't any kind of earth moving machinery available besides men with shovels.
Yep, so many questions.
All right, now let's go up to New South Wales now and check out Fort Banks in La Perouse. So when we looked this one up after someone mentioned it in a comment, we realised that it and Henry Head Battery were adjacent to the swanky New South Wales Golf Club that we mentioned in our first Star Fort episode. So Fort Banks is said to have been built prior to World War II, whereas they say the battery at Henry Head was built in 1892. Once again, we're dubious.
Mm-hmm. Then, just around the point, a little further from there, still in La Perouse, we have Bear Island and the Macquarie Watchtower.
Now both heritage listed sites, Bear Island is said to have been built in the late 1880s and can only be accessed nowadays via a paid guided tour. So you won't be seeing anything that they don't want you to see.
Mm-hmm. And then the Watchtower, the Macquarie Watchtower, is said to be the earliest known surviving sandstone tower building in Australia and the oldest surviving building on Botany Bay. Its exact date of build is not known, but it's said to be circa 1820 and built by convicts.
Wow. Built at the hands of unskilled labour and built with such skill and precision that it's still standing today.
Yeah, I know, crazy, right? Which made us dig a little deeper into this area and its history. So, the La Perouse suburb is named after French explorer Jean-François de Galaup Comte de La Perouse. Quite a mouthful, right? I'm just glad they shortened it just to La Perouse. Seriously. Now, what piqued our attention is actually something that we weren't fully aware of. So, apparently, La Perouse and his expedition of 2 ships arrived here in Australia, in Sydney, at this location to be precise, on the exact same day that the first fleet arrived. What are the odds of that happening, huh?
Oh my gosh. So, according to the official story, La Perouse's expedition arrived off Botany Bay on the 24th of January, 1788. Now, this is where La Perouse encountered the British convoy, the First Fleet, led by Captain Arthur Phillip of the Royal Navy, who was there to establish the penal colony of New South Wales, right? This is the official story. So, while it had been intended that the colony would be located at Botany Bay, Phillip had quickly decided that the site was unsuitable and the colony would instead be established at Sydney Cove in Port Jackson instead.
That's interesting, isn't it? He sees the French there and quickly decides that that location is no longer okay.
Yeah, I know it's weird because there's conflicting stories. Like we read a few different things, didn't we? And some say that they weren't there that day; they were there,
Couple days after, yeah.
But and then there's the story that they blame it on the high winds. But then, the main story that we're going off, they say that the French were received courteously and spent 6 weeks at the British colony. But I think it's weird they were received so courteously when the French and the British had been rivals for literally years, historical rivals, really.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find even weirder is that while the French were at the British colony for over 6 weeks, La Perouse and Captain Phillip did not meet in person once. Never. Not at all. I mean, why not?
It's really strange, especially when during their stay, the French apparently established an observatory and a garden, held masses, and made a heap of geological observations, according to the official story anyway. But who knows what they were really up to?
Yeah. And what was Phillips doing? Just blundering around trying to make ends meet while he waited for the second fleet to arrive with all those provisions that they'd forgotten on the first fleet. I mean, I don't know.
So odd.
It really is. And if you aren't sure what we're referring to, we recommend you go back to our first 3 episodes where we look at the preposterous story of the First Fleet in more detail.
Yes, definitely go check those out. So now we also learnt that the chaplain from one of La Perouse's ships, Father Louis Reservoir, was injured during a clash with Indigenous people in the Swan Islands and died at Botany Bay on the 17th of February. Reservoir was buried on shore at what is known as Frenchman's Cove.
Yeah, so that all happened. And then on the 10th of March, after stocking up on sufficient wood and fresh water, La Perouse and his men left New South Wales bound for New Caledonia, Santa Cruz, the Solomons, the Louisiades, and the western and southern coasts of Australia. And while La Perouse had reported in a letter from Port Jackson, apparently, that he expected to be back in France by June 1789, neither he nor any members of his expedition were ever seen again by Europeans. I mean, how weird is that?
Louis VI is recorded as having asked on the morning of his execution in January 1793, "Any news of La Perouse?"
That is just such a weird story. I don't believe the official narrative whatsoever for that one at all. And like, especially knowing that, the king was waiting specifically for news of what was La Perouse supposed to be doing, and what did they do to him to make him and all of his ships just disappear, never to be seen again?
Bloody suspicious.
I know. I think that the French are actually already here. Well, we know that they were finding, parts of Australia all over the place before the British anyway, but I think they may have actually already had, a settlement already here.
I agree.
Nuts, really is.
It does make you think, huh?
It does. Just another anomaly in Australia's mysterious history, JoJo.
Yep. So we had another comment from someone pointing out all the old stone seawalls that are built along the coast too. Now, the comment was focusing on the Balmain and Birchgrove areas. And just like we mentioned in our first Star Forts episode regarding when some of these old structures are renovated, the newer sections tend to deteriorate faster than the original parts of the buildings. And this appears to be the case for these old seawalls too. Are these perhaps the remnants of ancient harbours, long since forgotten or hidden from our history books?
Yeah, well, the things that we've been learning lately, JoJo, I believe that. Now, these 2 locations in Bondi were also suggested as possible sites too. So we had Mackenzies Point to the south and Ben Buckler Point to the north.
Interesting.
Yes, and the last few that people mentioned for Sydney are Barangaroo,
Ballast Point Park,
Sylvania Waters.
Look at that one.
Looks pretty man-made, doesn't it? I think it actually might be. I don't know.
I think it is. And The Opera House, which we know was actually the location of Fort Macquarie for many years until it was demolished for a tram depot, and is now home to one of Australia's iconic buildings.
Alrighty, now let's go to WA. Surprisingly, we had a few suspect areas here too. So the first one that was brought to our attention was this section of the Swan River, where we can see a very pointy section. And lo and behold, it's flanked on either side of the river by two golf courses. All right, now this next one sent us off on a totally different tangent. So, from looking up Point Perron in WA on Google Earth, we noticed Point Perron Camp School and thought to ourselves, what's that? We looked it up, then down the rabbit hole we went. Didn't we, JoJo?
We sure did. So, this camp that is open for school and community groups also goes by the name Fairbridge Village, named after the late Kingsley Fairbridge. This man from South Africa is responsible for the child immigration scheme from Britain to its colonies and the Fairbridge schools. He was actually the founder of the Society for the Furtherance of Child Immigration to the Colonies, which was afterwards incorporated as the Child Immigration Society and ultimately the Fairbridge Society. This was all in WA in the 1900s.
Yeah, now he got his inspiration for his emigration program from his great grandfather, Dr. James William Fairbridge, who was one of the founders of the Children's Friend Society, who was responsible for similar child emigration programs, which is probably a much nicer term for it than what it actually was, that sent orphaned and destitute children to Canada, Mauritius, Rhodesia, and New Zealand, and also to the Swan River Colony and in WA and Van Diemen's Land back in 1832. Now, this is something that we weren't aware of, and it's certainly not something that is mentioned on any official government history websites regarding Swan River and Tasmania. But we feel that this topic deserves a lot more research. Therefore, we're currently working on a full-length episode on the topic of forced child emigration to Australia. Specifically, looking at that earlier time frame of the 1830s, because, the 1900s stuff we were more aware of, weren't we, JoJo?
But not those earlier times, definitely not.
That's the first we kind of heard of it. So we're going to dig deep on that, and we'll get that episode out to you soon.
Okay, so moving on. The next place that someone mentioned was Exmouth in WA. So we assume that they suggested this location due to this, which Casey has looked into a little on Instagram. Now, do we think it's a star fort? No. But it's weird no matter what, especially with its pentagram shape. But what's even weirder is that they named it the Harold Holt Naval Communication Station after one of our late prime ministers who mysteriously disappeared while swimming at the beach, never to be seen again. Probably not so mysterious when you find out that he was actually fighting against this station from being built.
Yeah, and so then they name it after him. Evil, pure evil, seriously. So some people say that this is a huge HAARP weather modification station. Who knows? But what we do know is that according to the official narrative, it is a joint Australian and United States naval communication station. It is operated and maintained by the Australian Department of Defence on behalf of Australia and the United States, and provides VLF radio transmissions to United States Navy, Royal Australian Navy, and allied ships and submarines in the Western Pacific Ocean and Eastern Indian Ocean. The frequency is 19.8 kilohertz with a transmission power of 1 megawatt. It is the most powerful transmission station in the Southern hemisphere.
Wow. Okay, so we know if that's what they're telling us it is, it's probably something much more sinister.
Yeah, I agree. Alrighty, so the last one for WA is the Roundhouse, supposedly built in 1830, when it said that the colony was struggling to provide for itself due to its labour shortage, hence why they sent children over as indentured labour in 1832.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they still managed to build this. A prison with 8 cells and a jailer's residence. Why they needed a jail at that time, I don't know. All of which opened into a central courtyard. And apparently they built it on the cheap due to the builders being able to source the limestone locally. And in 1833, they also dug a 14-metre deep well in the central compound. And it also had a 57-metre long tunnel that linked it to High Street. Because that's exactly what a struggling colony needed, huh?
What's the bet that this building was already here and repurposed?
Yep, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now this last one was emailed to us by the very lovely Wendy, and she noticed that Cleveland Point in Brisbane had some Star Fort vibes happening.
Yeah, definitely, Wendy. I can see that too.
Yeah, it's
Unbelievable.
pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, well, that pretty much brings us to the end of Star Forts Revisited,
Wow,
JoJo.
that was quick.
It was. And it was cool that pretty much this whole entire episode was put together from suggestions from our awesome subscribers. I mean, really, it's all thanks to you guys. So
You
thank
guys are the best. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all your comments and all your suggestions. We honestly learn so much from you guys that way, and it always, sends us off in different directions and down little rabbit holes and tunnels and whatnot. So we appreciate it a lot.
We sure do, guys. And, the best part is we get to expose some of these crazy anomalies and oddities here in Australia and also give a bit of a history lesson at the same time, too.
Yeah, that's it. We sure
Yeah.
do.
So if you really like this video, please hit the like button and go ahead and share with all your friends and family just to get us out there. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do that as well. And we will see you all next time.
Yep. See you again soon, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.